My guest today has spent nearly 2 decades at the sharp edge of global finance and law, operating behind the scenes and supporting a range of global investment strategies, combining legal depth with strategic insight. He most recently served as General Counsel for the Americas and APAC at Man Group plc, the world's largest publicly listed asset manager, a role that placed him right at the intersection of financial markets, regulation, and strategy. Over his 17 years at Man, he supported investment strategies, including public and private credit, equities, derivatives, and futures, across global jurisdictions, shaping decisions that quietly influence how global finance moves. We came across each other when I was at Man. Even then, his reputation preceded him. Calm under pressure, commercially sharp, and known for balancing legal precision with commercial reality, leading with a rare mix of emotional intelligence and clarity. I'm excited to bring Sol Kuckelman to the Escalation Podcast today. We're going to talk about what it really takes to deliver and keep delivering in a role of this scale. This episode is about leadership, emotional intelligence, and the lessons in success and failure that come from operating at the highest level of the world's largest publicly traded hedge fund company. So I was thinking a lot about how best to start this conversation, and honestly, no introduction that came to my mind that I could come up with felt like it would do you justice. So for those who don't know you, and when someone asks, what do you do? Where would you like to begin?
Sure, yeah. I had a fantastic run at Man Group, the UK listed asset manager. I was, for the last 10 years, the General Counsel for Americas and APAC. I finished up in February, and then I had a variety of sort of other roles within the firm before that. And I think that's probably a core part of my identity, was really all my time at Man. It was really a fantastic experience, fantastic run. But I think, in thinking about what the brand is, that's really a, strategic advisor. There's a sort of other cliched iterations of that term, but I think that's really what I try to bring to bear in a professional environment.
I absolutely can vouch for that. Why have you chosen this career path?
Sure. I decided to go to law school sort of in the wake of some economic uncertainty that was right after kind of the financial sort of long-term capital management in the late 90s, and then 9/11. And sort of there was a lot of my friends who'd graduated right before me had all lost their jobs in New York as the dot-com bust and everything was happening. And so law school had been something that appealed to me, and it was an opportunity to pursue something that I think had really interested me even as a kid, kind of the junction of finance and law. And so I took that opportunity to pivot and go to law school. And sort of the rest is kind of history.
So I wonder, how do you explain your world to someone who's completely outside the industry?
What lawyers do best when they are doing the best job is really helping people solve problems. I think there's obviously all the documents and all the fancy lingo and jargon.
Yes.
But I think when lawyers really do the best and prove their value to clients, whether, that's sort of the accident, someone who's had an accident, which is the kind of classic way that many people interact with the law, or, there's a rent dispute, or obviously in quote unquote high finance, which is obviously where we work together. I think you're there to help someone who's got a problem and they've got to navigate this really complicated system. They don't have the tools, and they need someone who they can really trust to facilitate getting to a good outcome. And I think that's where lawyers can really do well. Where things go sideways, it's when that trust doesn't work out as well, and or people don't solve the problem. They just sort of talk a lot or create long memos which don't really get to an answer or create an action or have momentum to solve the issue at play.
So how did you get from, we got you to law school, and then obviously Man was a huge part of your career path.
Yes.
But I do know and understand that you first touched a little bit of the private practice world. How was that for you?
It was good. It was feels like a very long time ago. I worked at a really small firm that had hedge fund clients and private equity clients. When I graduated from school, or when I was applying, I think the the economy was still recovering a little bit from the dot-com stuff. And so there was not tons and tons of opportunities. So I went to the opportunity that was available to me, which was this small kind of hedge fund boutique. And then I got a call to have a chance to go to one of the big firms, or one of the big American firms, I should specify, which is Paul Hastings. And that was a very eye-opening experience because it was a huge difference from small practice. The clients were enormous financial institutions. There was like, the hours were crazy, but it was fantastic training.
Yes.
And that's, I think, the trade that many people make early in their careers is, the work-life balance is very challenging, but it's an opportunity to really learn how to become a lawyer.
Would you say that was one of the most, defining moments in your legal career, that kind of eye-opening moment of moving from a small regional law firm to a massive enterprise? What other defining moments in your career had after that?
I was, in some respects, slightly naive about what really asset management and financial services meant, having sort of touched it in a very specific way of fund formation and some stuff that was ancillary to setting up funds, to then going to a place that was at then peak in AUM and assets under management and share price. And then things fell apart very quickly. Lehman went and Bear went, and then Morgan Stanley was teetering, and the firm there was huge outflows and redemption requests as everyone was trying to find liquidity. And man was not obviously immune to any of that. And, the firm, I think in those first 5-6 years went from 2,500 people to 800, and AUM went from, 75, 80 billion to 25 or so. And, that was even after acquiring GLG. And so those years where I think of as very defining, because in a strong bull market where everything is performing, it's kind of easy. Everything is kind of easy, and you're never tested, or you're tested with far less frequency than in a down market when people are upset, people want their money back, and you got to really understand your documents to say, like, what do you do? And I think that whole lawyer solving problem thing comes up very seriously in that setting, because you're thinking about, well, like, how do we, we've got clients who really need their money back. Maybe they've got a pension demand, or they have demands on their own side to get, whatever that liability management is. How do we help them? And how do we make it so that, like, they think that we were good enough that when they have money again, they want to come back to us instead of having a scorched earth experience?
And has that made any of your beliefs that you held early in a career to completely shift? Or when you think about your career, at the outset, you had certain beliefs about yourself. We see ourselves through a certain lens. So what's changed that you no longer hold, or kind of had to let go in order to get to the top?
In private practice, I remember, like, the scoldings about, like, if you had a colon that in a list, it had to be semicolons, and that if you didn't do that right, or all the provisos being in the same format, all this stuff, which doesn't matter, categorically doesn't matter. I mean, and I think, thinking about that in the context of perfect not getting in the way of good enough, it's sort of, we need to solve a problem on an expeditious, timely basis. We need to get to yes. We need to figure out how to solve this problem, and getting caught up in things which are not relevant to the final outcome, to getting clients what they need. That was something I really had to learn. Lawyers often are often like reluctant to take risk in making a recommendation and hedge and say, here are your options, you choose. And that's not really as valuable to someone who's looking for guidance to solve their problem. So, thinking about, even if what's being proposed is non-viable or has some huge commercial risk associated, or financial risk or legal risk, whatever that is, the saying to the client or whoever you're working with, here's you can definitely do this, but I think I want to make sure you understand that these 3 things could happen, and that may not be in accordance with what you're trying to accomplish. That may be inconsistent with your goals. Accordingly, here's some other options that you might want to consider. Again, in a very succinct, super pithy, how do I get you what you need quickly way.
Is it practice that takes you to that level, or ChatGPT?
Oh, I mean, the technology, I mean, it's emotional intelligence is really mission critical. And I think ChatGPT is an extremely useful tool. especially and especially as it evolves, and I think I'm sure you've seen the same kinds of tools, these things that like do the jobs that junior associates did,
Yeah.
in seconds and are, cheaper by a factor of 1,000, say.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so great. So how do associates and how do like growing lawyers still get the training experience of thinking through the lens attendant to doing those kinds of things? The tools can be really useful to say like, did I miss anything? Run a first cut on this confidentiality agreement, service agreement, vendor contract, whatever that thing. That doesn't solve the emotional intelligence. And I think the emotional intelligence is partly how do you find a mentor at a firm, and how do you navigate the feedback process within a level of openness and self-awareness where you can say what went well, what didn't go well, even if I'm not going to take everything that everyone said, all the nasties, but I'm going to pick, are there some thematic things that I can draw from this on how I improve? And do I, change my manner with this particular set of people because they like things done in a different way or information delivered in a different way? And that's practice, I think.
Absolutely. And a lot of our listeners want to get to that level of the, banking and finance ladder. And the questions that we get asked most often, and I know they would love to get your perspective on it, is very simple, but the key skills that you have to possess and really perfect over your time to get to that level of being, global general counsel, someone who not only manages people, but a lot of hot potatoes and fires on daily basis. What would you say these skills are?
So I think as a baseline, you have to have all the skills. So the being detail oriented, being, timely, caring, all the kind of technical skills I think are obviously critical. I think the soft skills can be a massive differentiator in people and opportunities granted. In my mind, among the most important thing is really goes back to that emotional intelligence, which takes time and effort and vulnerability also of like being introspective and saying like, what am I doing right and what am I doing wrong? And then thinking about your professional interactions. So when you have an opportunity to interact with other teams, are you maximizing your personal branding opportunity? And that can feel a little bit like you're always selling yourself. And to some degree, whether you want to or not, you are, right? That's just an implicit aspect of work, right? And so if you think about those opportunities, particularly where you have opportunities to demonstrate that you're good, like how do you show that you're good without being like humble bragging or being obnoxious, but just that you're timely? I mean, there's the simple things like the power of a holding email. Let's say you're completely snowed or very busy, right? And you're like, I can't look at this right now. Okay, cool. Tell the person, figure out how to manage that relationship so that they know that you know that they're important and that they were there. As soon as you have an opportunity to do so, you will get back to them, as opposed to just being like, I'm too busy to even respond. Classic lawyer thing to do. Let's say you're having an opportunity to present or in front of a big group which has representatives from a bunch of different teams, stakeholders. How do you go into that meeting in a way where what you're going to present is everyone's going to be like, yeah, that's a great idea. Some of the things you could do ahead of time before the meeting is have one-to-ones maybe to talk to each of the big people who you think may have an objection, particularly if there's a budget constraint, there's a technological challenge. How are you thinking through what the other people are going to want and expect out of this so that they are aligned in getting in your outcome? And that your outcome could be a specific project. It could be a quarterly team thing. It could be like the firm's success or your personal success. It can be macro and micro. And so thinking about how are you cultivating those relationships that people feel like you're helping them and they're helping you in not in a manipulative way, but in like a mutually beneficial, virtuous circle.
Absolutely agree. And also, it's interesting that you mentioned internal stakeholders, because I was just thinking that negotiations sometimes with the internal and external clients, internal stakeholders, can be sometimes a little bit more trickier, even more difficult than dealing with external clients.
And throughout your career, you've dealt with massive, institutions, clients based globally. And this industry brings not only a lot of pressure, but also a lot of egos, a lot of people who like to be right. What are some of the biggest lessons that you've learned, not only about yourself, but about how to manage those egos, expectations, deadlines when dealing with global prime brokers, massive clients?
I think it starts on a fundamental level, which is understanding the vision of your firm or your client. What are you trying to accomplish? So there's this super old management consulting construct of like NASA in the 60s, and there was the janitor, and if you ask the janitor what the janitor's doing, the janitor's, I'm helping an astronaut get to the moon. And that was a certainty and clarity of mission and vision, which meant that everyone in the organization felt vested in accomplishing a collective outcome. That's not easy, right? And especially in financial services, it's not as kind of tangible and uniting as something like that. It can be more like, we want to get good returns for our clients, and it's always some kind of long thing, right? But if you understand what that is for the firm, then it means you can go in with some real emphasis in your conversations, or strength and conviction into those conversations, so that if you're going to the stakeholder who's always difficult, doesn't want to get to yes, you're like, no, I don't think you get this. This is the CEOs or the boards or the management committee or whoever's running the firm. This is what we are trying to accomplish for the firm. This is a critical client. And so they're like, oh, okay, so you're helping me be aligned to the firm's outcome, and I will look good for making this look good. Similarly, with when you're dealing with external clients, if they send you a crazy markup or they have a major list of demands, understanding from them, what is where are these coming from? What are they trying to solve? Maybe they got burned by someone else, and one of these terms is coming out of that. And so instead of thinking about well, we don't do that, or we can't say yes to that, how do I go into problem solving mode instead of digging my heels in and saying no? And I think that's one of the biggest things about the ego thing that you talked about.
Yeah.
Is it's in my experience, trying to shout over somebody.
Yeah.
Or, that's never helped. If someone gets, sort of into a difficult state, it's always, in my experience, it's better to take a break, be like, and you could figure out how to do that diplomatically instead of shaming them on the phone call. What we're focusing on for this conversation are building relationships for people that are looking to do something together. It's the beginning of a relationship. So having a super adversarial beginning of it is not a great outcome for anybody. I think the bilateral conversations, so one-to-ones, are almost always better than group calls. Group calls, I feel like no one wants to concede an inch because they don't want to be embarrassed if it turns out later they were wrong. And whereas in a bilateral, you can build some rapport, maybe make a friend or, professional colleague out of the relationship. And then also actually get to figure out how to get to yes.
I think feeling the room, what you're describing now, is so important in our profession. And that technical skill can get you in the room, but your legal alchemy, your ability to self-brand and be able to actually maintain the room, is what's going to keep you in the room. So there are two different things from what I've experienced. But as we're talking about these qualities and challenges, I wonder if you would say these are the same qualities of a good leader, because you also led people. It's not only about managing stakeholders and managing external clients or, underlying clients, but people management is a whole different game. And I often found when you do both and you have to be put your GC hat on, but also then be a manager at the same time, it is somehow conflicting because people will want to have that more personal touch with their bosses at times. What makes a good leader?
So I guess first thing I'll say is I don't think there's a one size fits all for good leaders. I think good leaders can come in very different, with very different packages. What I will probably reflect on are the things that I think have been successful for me, but they're not the only things. The one size fits all is not a great way of running teams. And I think in it, as much time as you're putting into your own development, the more time you put into thinking about the development of the people on your team and And also that, like, what do they need and how do they need it? And then how do you give them the best opportunities to grow? If you're earlier in your career, you may need more specific guidance, for example. So that's probably a different management style than managing someone who is older, like I've, managed people that are older than me. So I think there's some dynamism is really important. To really be thoughtful about what you're doing, and then also just listen.
Yeah.
The advancement is not going to be linear. So are you stepping out of the way to give them the chance to do those meetings or those pitches or those negotiations or whatever those professional opportunities are? This principle of making yourself redundant usually works. And I'm still a firm believer in it. But I think it's also really important for the development of the people for your team, because often as a leader, you're judged by the performance of your team. But also what I really try to do is get out of their way.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that by not providing them support, but how do I make sure that they have personal relationships with the heads of, the senior people in their areas, instead of everything had to flow through me? A, that's inefficient. B, it's demotivating if it's like they don't have the autonomy to make the decisions. Now, that's a later in career thing, but I think trying to see what are the earlier in career challenges or opportunities that you can provide to people on the team to grow. What are the stretch? How do you provide stretch? And that's hard as a leader, because failing in some areas is not really possible. So like, what are small failures? What are permissible failures of, like, that presentation didn't go as well as it could. Yeah. But like, we lost the litigation. Like that's not going to work. No. So it's, I think that's one of the idiosyncratic things about legal in particular, that, because I think having opportunities for professional failure is really important, especially a safe environment where you can, and then you can learn from it and then grow. That's what you want.
Super important. I was literally just about to ask you, what is your relationship with failure? Because that is pivotal in understanding the nuances of our profession, but also, you so adequately said, failure is not always an option. It's not something that we lost that litigation, but you have to, I suppose, build some level of resilience, understanding, factor in margin for error. So what is your relationship with failure? How has that been redefined over the years?
I think in general, most firms, good firms with good cultures, will forgive a mistake that you make once, learn from, and sort of never make again. I think it's very challenging if something happens twice. I think that's generally an off-ramp from a firm, and not a great professional look. But having guardrails around you to ensure that you're not in a position where those things happen is also, that they don't always exist. And I think the further you are in your career, the fewer guardrails there are, and the more it's kind of like sink or swim yourself. Yeah. For me, there is one particular, client negotiation in my mind that was, I think, the only one that didn't get to yes in my entire time at Man.
Wow.
It was something that we as a firm took a position on, and we socialized it. And I think that's a huge part of the quote unquote failure aspect, is not being on an island and ensuring you're working in a culture where you have peer and or senior relationships, which have an openness where there's an opportunity to discuss critical decisions. Not like every decision you're making, because then that begs a professional judgment question, but for the big things where there isn't a precedent or you're unsure, having people with whom you can have a professional discussion to say, like, what do we do here? And particularly where those things are like, we're saying no to revenue, you really want to be buttoned up. There's been other things about like, this is sort of back to the perfect not getting in the way of good enough, is like letting go of some of the early law firm stuff about like fixing people's documents, or, what are, like, if I'm negotiating something on a client's form or on a counterparty's form, it doesn't even have to be a client. What are the things that I really need to change, as opposed to the things that this inbuilt law firm training of being obsessive about commas and periods and formatting, like, you just have to like let it go, because it will ultimately be unhelpful to you. And if the other side gets irritated and they call the sales team and they're like, we're spending all this money to look at changes which have no bearing on the economic deal or what we're trying to accomplish here, you only look bad. I think you have to move to being like, I don't care. It doesn't matter. And
Commercial awareness.
Yeah. And I think kind of mission critical commercial awareness, especially for, kind of the big ticket negotiations, making sure you're not like selling short your client, your firm, but also like not adding deal agita or deal anxiety to everybody because, they feel like, you're going to be really difficult on this negotiation for no good reason.
Absolutely. It's not about legal semantics. It's more about having a seat at the table when things do go wrong. You want to be there, sat at the table making decisions and having conversations. I wonder, we talked about failures. I wonder what you consider your biggest success, victory. And obviously you mentioned only one negotiation or points that's not gone right in span of number of years, so that's a huge success already. But if there is anything specific that stands out that you think is part of your legacy, what would that be?
I think I'm very proud of what I accomplished at Man, for sure.
Yeah.
The teams I built, the relationships I forged. I mean, this was not because of me, but I was there, and we were there together for a good portion of the firm growing in my jurisdiction, in the area where I had a lot of the responsibility. It went from 3 billion to 61 while I was there. I mean, that's enormous growth. And again, I didn't do the sales. I didn't do the investment performance. But I think I did have a big role in the M&A deals that Man did.
Absolutely.
And a lot of the client negotiations and all the rest. And I'm very proud of that. And I think I was very fortunate to be in an experience that was to have the experience of being in a place that was willing to vest that much in me and give me that much responsibility. And I, tried to reciprocate in kind in like giving it my all the whole time. And that's something I am proud of, is like, I didn't leave anything on the table. Sort of, it was sort of like I was all in when I was there. And I think that's still, I hopefully still felt, in some shape or form at the firm.
100%. And I think, you kind of shaped it from the inside out. That's why on the Escalation podcast, I love talking to people who are shaping the industry from the inside out. And you are an insanely incredible, I can't even find the word, asset to anyone who's going to be, lucky enough to work with you going forward.
Kind.
But
very kind.
No, absolutely. I just wonder if there's been anyone or any lessons, we talked about lessons, but any advice that you received rather than lessons from people that you've worked with over the years that really stood out. Any other kind of pieces of advice that you would have received, but career specific, that, stand out for you?
I do think having real conviction about where you're working makes a lot of sense. You spend the vast majority of your waking hours with your professional colleagues, and being in a place that you like the people, you like the culture, I think is really important, because all we have in life is time. And I do think having some degree of passion that you're bringing to work, even if that means pivoting and saying, I'm not doing finance anymore, I'm going to go do something humanitarian, or I'm going to go to education, whatever that may be. I think making sure you're spending your professional hours with some degree of like conviction, or a lot degree of conviction, feels right. I was really lucky to go on like a management consulting course at Man very early on. And I think that's something else that's worth thinking about, even as an adjunct through Udemy or YouTube or other places where there's self-discovery and self-help tools available, is having some crash course in management consulting. And because a lot of the thematic elements that we've talked about today of stakeholder management, emotional intelligence, mapping, power mapping, so much of this stuff is really out of like old, I don't know if it's from McKinsey or PwC or one of these consulting firms, but it's really out of their, kind of their human resources consultancy. And and some people just come into life with these skills. But I think that's the other one, is really figuring out how to cultivate all those ancillary supplemental professional skills, which don't have to do with subject matter expertise, but have to do with how you deliver things and to whom, because that's almost more important than the substance often.
Could not agree more. I've sat in rooms where people had very little substance, yet they've been listened to because of their presence and the way they possess the room and ability that they've shown to own the room.
Yeah.
But I wonder, we talked about the successes, we talked about the failures, and your career so extraordinary over the span of the years. Have you ever thought about quitting, or were tempted to jump to the sell side or return to private practice? Has there been ever a moment when you came home and thought, that's it, I'm done?
Not really. One of the things that was great about working in a global organization that has operations everywhere, funds everywhere, is the complexity. It's not that work was never work. I mean, I don't know if that's really ever true. I mean, always it's work. There's always stuff that's drudgery. But I think a lot of it was like enjoying those things that I really liked because that I defined for myself. And so pursuing them was fun. And so it didn't necessitate this kind of burnout quit. Obviously there's moments of like in the midst of an M&A deal when you're doing due diligence and negotiating deal terms till 2-3 o'clock in the morning, it's hard, of course. Yeah. But there's that was never like, let's quit. It was like, let's get to closing and then let's bring this business in and then let's see let's shoot for the stars and see how we can make this happen. My quick aside about private practice, going back to private practice from being, and I don't, Edita, I'd be very interested if you agree with this, is I think it can be very challenging in the kind of quasi mercenary aspect of the way the practice, the legal practice has become, where having a portable book of business, meaning that you have a bunch of people who rely on you and are going to call you and send you work on a consistent basis, is so critical to having any power in going into firms and being able to dictate your hours and dictate the resources that are allocated to you. Because if you go back from a in-house position, how firms work, like how asset managers work maybe, but you have no book, you have no revenue. And so you therefore are at the behest of whoever does have revenue to do the work they send you whenever they send it to you. And that's a huge pivot in autonomy and hours and work-life balance and all the rest, which is just sort of how it is if you go back to private practice. So that has not been where my head's been focused. That I'm not saying it could never happen, but I because of that, because I don't have like a portable revenue stream to take to a law firm, that has been somewhat less appealing as a place to go.
I couldn't agree more. I think for me, I knew months after qualifying I was not cut for private practice, and I could not live by units and KPIs. And look, we deal with all these performance indicators in every corporate environment, but the autonomy and the freedom that you were talking about was just non-negotiable to me. I think Man was such a fantastic opportunity. I would not be able to do what I'm doing today had it not been for the years that I spent there, the people that I met, the relationships that we've built. I just was ready for a different identity, for a shift towards entrepreneurship. But that part has just been a pivotal part of my becoming, which leads me to the next question. Biggest lessons. I'm kind of moving towards this advice piece for especially younger listeners who want to achieve what you've achieved, who have that aspiration to get to the top on Wall Street in our industry. And we talked about the skills a little bit, but I just wonder, firstly, and that's a question we get a lot, is the grind a must? Do I have to sacrifice? Do I have to sacrifice my 20s to become the general counsel? Later on, do I really have to grind? Because Gen Z doesn't like the grind. They are rewriting the rules, and they feel like they, from my perspective and experience, are a little bit more entitled. There's no longer that, we used to put the big banks on the pedestal a little bit, jobs that were paying so much and were driving the economy forward were, to a certain level, I feel, on the pedestal. And then 2008 happened, But the grind is a very interesting topic for us, especially on the Escalation podcast. And we talked about it a lot, and I talk about it with all of my guests. So did you have to grind? Is the grind a must?
The grind, I think, it's hard to avoid. I don't know if the grind is the analyst that graduates from an elite school and then goes to one of the big banks for 2 years and then goes to get an MBA. I don't know that exists in the same way, because going back to the technological tools that we talked about. So, AI, right, can create a deck in a matter of minutes in a way that would have taken all weekend working, all weekend. And so I think that aspect has changed. And so I think you could be much more efficient with your time, but commitment or passion or grind, those are somewhat synonymous, maybe in a Venn diagram sort of way, because they have different nuances or whatever. But I think to the extent that you really want something, you have to show it, and you have to also ask for it too. You can't, there's sort of a set it and forget it aspect of career where it feels like, if I just put my head down and work hard, everything will take care of itself. And that's sort of true, but I think doing it with intention is quite important. And what does with intention mean? It means understanding the power dynamics. So who's making the decisions about who's getting promoted? Do you have a relationship with that person? Do they know who you are? Do they care? Do they think your brand is good? And so grinding for the sake of grinding anonymously doesn't feel like a good use of time. Grinding on things that are important for the people who are making like the decisions about who will advance and have an opportunity to move up feels probably required in order to get there. Probably for the best, but like at the same time, that's kind of what everyone expects, is this very frenetic pace and pushing it. And to the extent you are an agent of pushing it and getting things done, and therefore, for example, realizing revenue by virtue of getting a new deal done with a client, that is an actual demonstration of value to the firm. And those are the kinds of things that accrue, more and more of them, to create a brand that you are good and therefore deserve more opportunity. And that comes with grind. It's kind of an unavoidable aspect, but I think it's not just like, I'm going to, be at the office putting in FaceTime until 10 p.m. every night. It's more like, how do I try to get allocated the professional opportunities from the people who matter? And if I'm not, how do I still do a good job so that the people who I'm working for recognize it and send me to the next level to do the next things?
There was another piece of advice that I was, when preparing for this interview, thinking I would love to hear your perspective on that. If you were to start from scratch, and build a successful career as you have already built, what would be the top 3 skills you focus on today, knowing what you know?
Oh man, I got very lucky. So, luck has a lot to do with it, as does sort of privilege of going to good places and, having the experiences. And I think those factors have had huge positive effects on where I've gotten. Not to say that I'm not an agent of my accomplishments, but like going to good schools and networks and all those other things have been really important to get where I've been. So that sort of acknowledged, if one wants to pursue a legal career, going to the best law school you can, I think makes sense. And then working at the best law firm you can stomach for as long as you can makes sense. Trying to get some exposure to different areas, every law firm associate who wants to go in-house is always like, I want to be closer to the business. And it's like, okay, cool. But see if when you're even at the law firm, how you can get to know your client without charging them, to understand what's driving their decisions. Why are they coming to you for work? Using those opportunities to like become more commercial, I think, is useful. And then being really thoughtful about the choice when it's time to go, of where to go. And not every opportunity is created equally, but also all of the in-house opportunities after leaving a law firm means you're pivoting from being a revenue generator to a cost center, which means all the things that come with that, which, you're not the person driving the bus on creating growth and revenue for a place. You are someone who is hopefully doing a good enough job that you're stopping risks from taking place. So that, that means thinking about like, what are the chances of me advancing at this place? Maybe they're zero. How stable are the revenues at this place? How diversified are they? Is there one person who is going to dictate whether this firm lives or dies? I think that, that if the sequencing is law firm in-house, that makes sense. I think that's a very logical path, but like law firm in-house having the career, I don't know. I mean, I feel like I was very, very, very lucky and very fortunate.
But you know what I say about luck? That's opportunity meeting preparation. So
yeah,
that's exactly where you found it.
Yeah. No, there's definitely something to that, of course.
Yeah. Tell me, as we're coming slowly to the close, I've got a couple of questions that I still want to ask. What are your secrets to successful negotiations? Straight from Sol's playbook. Give me a couple of kind of top secrets.
Yeah, I think it's giving on the things that don't really matter, being thoughtful about what are the things that you're bringing to it, so that whoever your counterparty is like, I'm dealing with a logical person who wants to get this done. And then also, we talked about this earlier in the podcast, is the power of the bilateral conversations. So, how do I get this person on a one-to-one basis, not to like try to overwhelm them or anything, but just to have as open and frank of a constructive conversation as possible, where no one feels like they have to perform in front of an audience. And instead it's like, let's try to be as efficient as possible in getting through as many things. The other stuff is also things that we've talked about, which is all the stakeholder management. So it's when you're going into a negotiation, understand and this is sort of more emotional intelligence, is like, why is this person asking for this? Is it because they really need it? Is it because there's some local requirement? Like what is generating it? And so is it something that we're going to have to get comfortable with if we want them as a client or as a counterpart or whatever? Or is it something that like they're just trying on to see what they will succeed in getting? And then similarly, like when the lawyer is not the decision maker on it and has to talk to other people, how are you making that process as efficient as possible? Delivering this kind of preemptive solutions that are baked, that are like, operations, I think this is what you're going to want on these terms. Compliance, I think this is going to work. Do you agree? As opposed to open-ended questions, which are like, hey, I don't really know. Tell me what you want to do. Everyone is like, oh man, that's so much harder than here's a pre-built solution. So it's all those kinds of things, which I think, create a dynamic with your counterparty, of demonstrating that you're like trying to get to yes. Now, in litigation, completely different, and in contentious employment, very different. I mean, this is really in commercial negotiations when you're trying to get to yes on a deal, as opposed to like you're adverse and you're trying to reach a settlement, for example.
Yeah.
So.
Understood. Shifting the lens ever so slightly, I really am interested in your opinion, your views on how this industry has evolved over the past decade. And you've seen it shifting and impacting not only jobs, people that you work with, the geopolitical impact as well has been tremendous. What do you think will be the biggest game changers in our industry in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah. So I think a few things. So I think there's, the geopolitical, I'll just start quickly on the geopolitical. I mean, one hopes that the geopolitical environment improves in a way that people feel good about doing deals cross border again.
Yeah.
Obviously there's trade barriers have been created in the United States, does that, and there's reciprocal trade barriers which are being erected in other places. There's global dynamics with China and the United States. There's the question about what the reserve currency is, because China obviously is very keen for it to move to the yuan. The U.S. is obviously reliant on it remaining in the dollar and all the correspondent banking system, because that's how sanctions are actually implemented. So that whole macro thing is definitely one to watch, because the world is moving, and there's been fewer kind of sanctions, counter sanctions between the U.S. and China more recently, but that doesn't feel like it's ending. So that feels like a macro thing. All the non-bank lending, private credit has grown from effectively a non sequitur. I think it existed, but it has become an incredible strategy that tons and tons of people are in. But it has not yet sort of gone through its first challenging period per se in the way that like 2008 was for all the funds. So we'll see what happens. I mean, there's tons of deals out. There's tons of people raising money, continue raising money, good performance. That feels like, but it feels like maybe there's something could happen that may present some challenges in that area. Just because there's so many new entrants and it's so competitive that it means people start to, in the same way that, global macro funds were in Argentinian real estate in 2007, 2008, the style drift and therefore the credit degradation, I think is a potential inevitability there because people are just looking to source new deals. What else? I mean, I think this is not novel, but the barbelling, people are not launching funds really with less than $1 billion, $1.5 billion, $2 billion. I'm sure there are some that are smaller, but it seems like most people are only starting if they can really raise major money. And that's in part because of the compliance burden. Without making a political statement about that, that's the nature of running a firm now, is that you need to have, revenues of a size sufficient to support all the operational infrastructure attendant to complying with the FCA requirements or the SEC or all the global regulators. And then, I think it's a mature industry, right? The 10, 15 years ago, there was still a little bit of the tail of the early hedge fund period of the private jets and all the rest of that. And that still exists, obviously, in some shape, but it's way less, and it's way more of a kind of, not stodgy, but it's way more of an institutional business now than it was a long time ago. And that doesn't feel like that's going to end. It feels like that will only trend up as the principal allocators, notwithstanding, the announcement for, defined contribution plans in the U.S. to be able to allocate to alternatives. I think the vast majority of allocators are institutional and therefore expect institutional quality at their managers.
I agree. I think that was such a great overlook. I wanted to ask,
sure,
what's next for Sol?
What's next? So I've been focused on finding, it was sort of what I mentioned earlier, which is the GC jobs at asset managers. So that search is very much underway. I'm really looking forward to landing and getting back deep into this and, recommencing all the relationships.
So lucky to have you.
Oh, that's so kind. That's so kind.
I know. I can't wait. I'm very excited for your next chapter. Are you considering buy side or sell side or both, or are you kind of agnostic at this point in time, or do you have a preference?
Principally buy side. I mean, I think that's where I've cut my teeth, and so I think that's the most logical place for me to land. Is kind of the bigger buy side firms.
And finally, I wanted to close with the question that I ask every guest here on the Escalation Podcast.
Sure.
Escalation being the word that, in my view, at the time when I came up with this idea, with the project, the most accurately describes the industry. How do you deal with escalations, high pressure that the industry is so famous for?
I think it's really caring about what matters and not getting swept up in it. There's, I had a personal life event that took place in 2015, big fire, and it was kind of close to the end for everybody in my family, and it was very serious. And so, that just has a fundamental reset about like, oh, the counterparts aren't in order on my side letter in the PDF, like, don't care, like they're there, so or even, like there's a trade error, or there's an event, or there's a operational incident, or all these things, they've happened. You can't change the fact that they've happened. And pivoting instead of going into like the panic spinning mode, just being like, I'm going to move into problem solving mode, and we're going to figure this out, and this too shall pass. Even when it's like, the Department of Justice on the phone, or, serious fraud office, like panicking does nothing. And it's, it's not personal, and it's, barring extreme circumstances, it's not personal. And then it's just a matter of how do you navigate through whatever the challenge is, or, you know, the adversarial event, or the whatever the problem is, and because it just, you got to just kind of maintain, because ultimately most of it will not matter to, it matters a lot in that moment and it feels like it matters, but it doesn't.
Yeah.
And panicking is really counterproductive to getting to a good outcome quickly and efficiently. And ultimately your colleagues are expecting you to help them and solve problems. I mean, it's the same thing to where we started, to solve the problems. And that's what you're there to do. And sort of it's almost like how do you de-escalate, either internally, even if or, you know, maintaining that calm. And then if you need to call a friend or a spouse or a partner or something, you know, and having a venting moment, fine.
Yes.
But maintaining that equilibrium externally so that everyone feels like we're good, we're taken care of.
Yeah.
It's going to be okay. The final thing I'll say is also the further on you go in your career, it's also thinking about how do you not cause panic or alarm in other people. So like thinking about, like, you know, everyone's discovered bad things that have happened, mistakes, errors, whatever. It happens. Everyone's human, and that's just the nature of it. So thinking about if you're going to go to your CEO or whoever the stakeholder is to talk about the problem thing that's happened, how are you presenting it? And again, thinking back to you're there to provide solutions. This thing happened. Here's who we're going to talk to first. Here's our comms plan, you know, communications plan, or here, you know, like here's how we're going to solve it. That's a demonstration of leader. That's going back to what a good leader is. That's a demonstration of leadership, is understanding that like this question is understanding how and when to escalate it. And also so much of it is in the tone, manner, and all of it, as opposed to like, yes, everyone should know, but how are you presenting it in the right way that we're not all creating panic? It's like, this is happening. It's in order. We're going to get it solved. All good.
I love that. Before we wrap up, is there anything I haven't asked that you feel like sharing?
No, I've really enjoyed this. So thank you very much for inviting me to be on the program.
Oh, thank you so much for your time, for your candor, for sharing the journey, the insights. And I know for so many of our listeners, this is going to be a golden nugget. There was so much wisdom here today, and it's been a real privilege having you on the Escalation Podcast. So thank you again. And
Pleasure.
I wish you all the very best in what's ahead. I'm really hoping that next time, maybe when you're here in London, we'll get to sit down for another conversation. That would be
I look forward to
fabulous.
it. That'd be great. It'd be my privilege. Thank you very much.